as a military organization. We've stood it up. Now we have to understand what we do and why we do it, right? That's Saltzman. What are we doing and why are we doing it? How do we do it? And I think the baton, as it's getting passed to Doug Schiess, his job is going to be, all right, we got to go do it. We have to operationalize these things that we have set up.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. This week, the Senate Armed Services Committee heard testimony from Space Force Lieutenant General Douglas Schiess. This was his confirmation hearing as the administration's nominee to replace General Chance Saltzman and become the Space Force's third chief of space operations. All told, the hearing took less than 44 minutes, and just 6 senators showed up to ask questions. The committee has a total of 27 members. Senator Angus King of Maine felt compelled to say that their absence was not out of a lack of support or interest. Senators lightly touched on issues such as radio spectrum, whether the service is adequately resourced, and its deficit in civilian personnel. The most pointed question came from Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He wanted to know whether the Golden Dome project can be scaled down and still work. Schiess gracefully dodged by saying a lot of, quote, good things, unquote, will come from Golden Dome, and that he looked forward to working with Space Force General Michael Gutlein, who is the director of that project. What the senators didn't ask were simple, basic questions like, what are your priorities? Or a simple, what do you need from us that's not in the defense appropriations bill to carry out your priorities? While it's dangerous to predict how votes will go, it's really clear that unlike other nominees currently under scrutiny, Schiess is sailing through and at a fast clip. In this episode, we're going to take a look at who Schiess is and what are the particular challenges that he is likely to face at this stage of the Space Force's development. What he does will shape the service branch for years to come. Joining me are Jennifer Reeves, a retired Air Force colonel and space professional, and Patrick Donley, also a retired Air Force colonel whose current focus is on developing leaders. And both of them have known Schiess for years. Here's our conversation. Hey, Jen, Patrick, thank you for joining me on the Downlink podcast.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for including me in this conversation as well.
Oh, it's great to have you both. So let's have you two take a moment to tell the audience what you do and where you do it, and briefly how you know Lieutenant General Doug Schiess. And Patrick, why don't you start?
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I currently am the director of the Air and Space Forces Association Doolittle Leadership Center. And in that role, I have a primary mission for our center to go out and build better leaders across all sorts of different leadership arenas, from the military professional side to the nonprofit or the corporate side, to even down to people's families. And I met Doug Schiess years ago at Patrick Air Force Base. We were both group commanders at Patrick Air Force Base. He was the operations group commander, and I was the mission support group commander. And so we got there at the same time. We were there the full 2 years together. We sat side by side very often in meetings and at the launch console, and we just got to be really close friends. And so he and I have stayed in touch ever since.
Fantastic. And Jen, what about you?
So I am a senior resident fellow at the Mitchell Institute's Space Power Advantage Center of Excellence. We're a non-profit, non-political think tank in Washington, D.C. And on the space side, of course, we are looking to further space policy and underpin, a dominant air and space force in the United States. And I got there by being a retired Air Force colonel, actually, but I spent close to 29 years in the Air Force as a space weapons officer, being out and about in combatant commands on the joint staff, the air staff. And I met Doug Schiess when we were captains way back in Colorado, way back what seems like 1,000 years ago.
Did he have more hair?
No, I don't think he did even then. But what I can tell you is I met Doug for the first time, and we were a bunch of captains standing around. I think we all had beers in our hands. We were in somebody's garage, and everybody knew everybody through work, and we were all kind of getting to know the random people who weren't yet connected. And again, that was sometime I think that was in the mid-90s. That was a long time ago. Mid-90s, late 90s, something like that. Regardless, it's been a long time.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you both. But as you know, I am taking a wee bit of a different approach to covering Schiess's promotion. And after watching the hearing, I think Doug Schiess is a real shoo-in. I mean, it just seemed like there was, nothing controversial or anything like that. But I also don't want to dissect each bit of testimony because I think there are bigger, more strategic questions beyond how Space Force plays with the National Reconnaissance Office or electronic warfare. And I'd like to have your take on a couple pieces of audio that I think get at the strategic opportunities and challenges. I also think a little window on the room might be helpful for the audience because 21 of the 27 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee didn't actually show up. And that's more than 3/4 of the committee. And while I understand that there was one headliner controversial confirmation hearing that was for Todd Blanche, that doesn't mean senators can't go back and forth between hearings. And in fact, that's what they often do if they have an interest. So here's a clip of something that stood out to me. And what's different here is that it's not an answer. It actually is a statement from Senator Angus King of Maine.
Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by an acknowledgement that I was a skeptic of the Space Force when it was first proposed. Senator Kramer was a principal sponsor, and as painful it is for me to acknowledge, he was right and I was wrong. I believe that the Space Force now is providing an essential part of the deterrent and the defense of this country.
And starting with you, Jen, what are your thoughts on what we just heard?
Well, I think it's really good news, and I love that Senator King actually said it out loud. I love that he was initially a skeptic. I love more that he's a reformed skeptic, but I'm so grateful that he actually said it out loud. I think in earlier confirmation hearings that there were more skeptics. And so that one senator actually said it out loud and then said, no, I actually see the reason why this separate service exists. So now let's move on from talking about the existence of the service to other more important, more timely things that I know that we're going to continue to talk about, right? There are other more important and more timely things that we need to talk about, jobs that the Space Force has to get down to doing, leaders that they need to have to do them, as opposed to this discussion that has happened multiple times over the first 6 years of the service's existence as simply as to whether or not it should exist in the first place. So I think that was a nice little coda to hear that from Senator King.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it conveys an important evolution in terms of people's thinking. It's always hard for people to be able to open their minds to the possibility of being something different. And I think generally as human beings, we're resistant to change. We tend to think that, well, things seem to be working fine as it is. Why should we change? And I think oftentimes with really big decisions like standing up a separate service, the people who know best about what type of benefits could come from, in this case, standing up a new service devoted to space that's run by Guardians as an independent fighting domain, oftentimes those people are, they're almost like prophets talking about things that they know and can see, but other people without that background just have a very difficult time wrapping their heads around it. And I think this acknowledgement from Senator King is conveying a gradual acceptance and an understanding of the benefits that a separate Space Force can bring. And I think that's typical. It just happens over time that people have to be convinced, they have to see the value. And as their understanding grows, their willingness to accept the change grows with it. And in this case, I think it's a good sign because it's so clear at this point that people are actually openly acknowledging now, we're past this, let's move forward.
I think it's really analogous to where we are, that it just sort of shows at once that, yes, people can stop being skeptics, that they can accept the Space Force. I also think it shows an opportunity to convince more, and also a little bit of the challenge, right? Because again, as I said, there are a lot of people that weren't there, a lot of senators. And for me, it leaves the question of, are there more? Are there more skeptics that still need to be convinced? Anyhow, moving along, Jen, the importance of words, that words matter. I want to know what you think about this soundbite. And it's another exchange between Senator King and Schiess.
Say that, heaven forbid, there would be another major conflict. It would really probably start in space.
Senator, I believe that's a possibility that it could start in space. But if not, definitely space would be at the very beginning of any conflict, especially with potential adversaries of China or Russia.
I interrupted. Please go ahead to make the case for the budget increase.
What I'd say is for decades before the Space Force, in the Air Force, and then now, we have provided incredible combat relevant effects to the joint warfighter. We can talk about GPS. We can talk about SATCOM. What is different now is we need the ability to have space superiority. And what that means is we have to have the ability to counter someone else's ability to hold our satellites at risk and to be able to destroy them.
And the vast bulk of that money is
isn't that amazing? That he actually used that term. He said the word destroy in reference to adversarial satellites, which are space-based, which is not anything truly that we as a service, really as a nation, have talked about. Even bandying it about in lesser formal situations, and certainly not from a policy perspective, that in the vaunted halls we would even utter these types of words. I mean, we really have not been allowed to do that. As a young space officer, 25, 30 years ago, we wanted to talk about these things and we simply weren't allowed to talk about these things. And now we have the prospective chief of space operations in his testimony talking about exactly this, which I think is a needed next step for where we have to go, not because we want conflict in space, but because conflict in space is going to find us. And that is happening because of other nations and some generally and genuinely aggressive actions that are happening in the domain that unfortunately most people are not witting of, because space is hard. It's challenging to know what's happening up there. First of all, it's very far away, right? In distances that we really cannot imagine. Some of our most useful satellites are sitting all the way out 23,000 miles away, and then, of course, much further. So just distances, and then, of course, small things in the dark blackness of space. You have to have specialized equipment to track things, to listen to them, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, it's hard. People don't know, but we are there.
See, what I think was really interesting there is that, when General Chan Saltzman was nominated, he didn't use the word destroy except for in reference to China destroying things, right? Not that we should have the capability to destroy and therefore deter aggression. And that's different.
Yeah, I think it's dramatically different. And I think that it is part of this evolution that hopefully is happening more gracefully than if it had to happen because of what we've talked about in the past or made mention of, like the possible space Pearl Harbor. We don't want it to happen that way. We want to be forward looking and think about some possibilities perhaps eventualities and be prepared for those, as opposed to waiting for something very negative, very untoward to happen to us, and then we have to respond and then come up with policy for these types of actions.
Now, this hearing was a mere 44 minutes, right, for a service branch that is critical to the success of the entire Joint Force. And the core mission is to organize, train, and equip the professionals to ensure the United States can fight tonight. So, Jen or Patrick, what didn't the hearing cover that you think is important? And I'm not talking about the classified weapons systems or Golden Dome. I'm talking about perhaps something larger.
I just want to go back and address the last point if I can really quick.
Of course
just a quick add on to what Jen said, which I completely agree with. I think it's important to remember the context of the conversation. One is in context of money and an increased desire to get more money. There is a need to communicate, why do we need the extra money? Because we need to be doing something different. The second thing I would say is we're talking about a deterrent capability. A deterrent is only good if you have the capability and the will to use it. And I think that there's an important point that General Schiess is making here, that it's one thing to say we have a certain capability. It's another thing to express. And we've moved to the point where we are now conveying not only to our congressional leaders and to our national leadership, but we're also conveying to our adversaries that we not only have capability, but we're now openly acknowledging the will to use them if necessary. And I think that bolsters our deterrent capability overall. In terms of things that weren't talked about, I actually think that potentially one of the reasons that so few senators in the room and why so few questions were asked and maybe even fewer controversial questions were asked is partly because of who General Schiess is, because of their familiarity with who he is, the conversations that he's already had with them, and the fact that he comes with a resume that really is tailor-made for a position like this. There's not a lot, in my opinion, there's not a lot of unknowns about General Schiess. And so a lot of times when you watch testimony like this, there's something nagging at someone that they're really trying to figure out, can I trust this person? Do I think he's the right person for the job? And in this case, I think it's a great sign for General Schiess and for the Space Force that there was 6 people there, 21 out of 27 weren't there. I think had there been something about General Schiess's character or something about maybe some rogue thought that he had expressed at some point in the past that they needed clarification on, that you can bet they would have been there. And I think the lack of questions conveys a confidence amongst that committee that, hey, we already pretty sure he's the right guy. And so no further questions needed.
Jen, anything missing for you?
Well, yeah, I think there was an opportunity, maybe from both sides, that could have happened. And of course, I do want to get back in a minute and talk about how great Doug is and how perfect he is for this role. Okay, perfect. Want to make sure we don't miss that. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, we're not. It's coming up.
But here's something that I think could be looked at, and I think it's needed. Now, it might be uncomfortable even for both sides, but I definitely think it's necessary. The Space Force was stood up almost 7 years ago, and what hasn't been done since the Space Force has been stood up as a service on par with the other military services is a roles and missions review to make sure that those precious dollars that we are spending, that everybody understands who is spending what, with whom, for what purposes, and how everybody plays well together. And I think there are some challenges these days. You know, the Air Force appears to have zero space capability, but the Army is getting enormous in their space. I mean, they are really redoubling their efforts to have huge space capability. And their purpose is to support other Army units. And I don't quite understand that. And then I'm not exactly sure what the Navy is doing. I'm not exactly sure what the Marine Corps is doing. They're kind of keeping their heads down. But I think that at a larger level above the services, having a roles and missions discussion to understand now with this sort of new kid on the block, i.e. the Space Force, how are we going to organize and train and equip all of our space forces then to properly apportion to the right combatant commands to actually create the effects and ensure that we underpin our joint forces out there, as well as gaining and maintaining space superiority where and when we need it. And I don't think we're there yet. Now, what I would like to say is I don't think we're wrong, that this is a natural evolution when you stand up new organizations, that you look back and you need to see, okay, how did we do? What do we need to do now, perhaps differently, moving forward? And I do think this might have been an opportunity for either side, perhaps, to discuss roles and missions in and among the...
Or priorities.
Yeah.
Like, what are your priorities? You know, I think that's a softball, right?
So
like,
there you go.
What are your priorities?
I think that could
you
have
know,
been asked.
what do you want to improve on? Yeah.
How well do you play with your sister services? What does that look like?
Or do you think you need your own JAG? Or
Oh, sure.
do you
Sure,
think
sure,
you need
sure.
your own PAOs?
Yeah.
Or any of those other things that are part of other service branches?
Yes.
I mean, the Marines have their own PAO system, so they're out. They keep sending me stuff all the time. So I just kind of am waiting for it for the Space Force, and maybe that's a different conversation. But it might, again, what are your priorities? Now, as you know, I've asked you both here because you know Doug Schiess, and well, I don't, beyond the usual events and conferences. So, who is Doug Schiess? Who is he as a person, as a leader, and especially under pressure? Jen, you have known him since you were captains, as you said. So you should spill the beans first, right? Where did your paths cross in your career? And and why do you think he should be CSO?
Well, so for me, we've been sort of tangential to each other for a long time and have just known each other more personally through friends and acquaintances for many, many years. More recently, with my role at the Mitchell Institute, I've had the opportunity to interview General Schiess a number of times, and he is, of course, and always has been, and I imagine always will be, the consummate gentleman. But also, he is has a tremendous reputation of being just this confident, capable, but very sort of low drama kind of guy, right? He gets in, he gets the job done, he gets his people on board. People that I have talked with who have worked for him have enjoyed working for him. He's typically kind of a no-nonsense kind of a guy. I've met his wife many times. She's wonderful. I mean, they're a great couple. I'm excited for him to be our next chief of space operations. I think he's going to do great.
And Patrick, you and Schiess were commanders together, as you said. I believe it was it's Patrick Air Force Base, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, Florida, as part of the 45th Space Wing for roughly 2 years, 2012 to 2014. I know you're still friends, but during that time, what did you observe from him as a leader? And because you are with the Doolittle Leadership Center, the director, no less, I mean, this really is completely in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, thanks for that, because he's a friend that I respect very much. I value his friendship. And as you said, we commanded together. We got there at the same time. While we were in the missions of our individual groups were quite different, they were very much connected. As he was ensuring the payloads got to space, my job was to ensure that all of the support was necessary to make sure that happened. And so we worked very, very closely together, but it was more than just a professional relationship. We very quickly became friends. We went to the same church. Our families knew one another. He was the kind of guy, he was one of the people at that assignment that I knew I could go knock on his door or call him up at any point, and we could sit down together and we could just hash through whatever difficulty that we might be going through. And we always knew that we had each other's backs. And if if I needed something, I knew Doug was somebody I could call on no matter how busy he was, and he would stop what he was doing and help me out. And I hope he felt the same way about me. I thought it was great in his testimony that he was able to start with just talking about his wife and his children. When he says they're partners, he and Debbie truly are partners. They're partners professionally as well as personally. They're just a wonderful team that they go hand in hand. And I love the fact that he acknowledged her contribution and the family's contribution. And I think for me, I would just say that when I think about Doug and his leadership and the qualities that Jen was just talking about, I go back to two things that I know are extremely important for Doug. And that's he's a man of faith, and he's a man that's focused on his family. In addition to his professional role, he's able to take those qualities and merge them together. And I think those things give him a stability that is really the background of what Jen was talking about. He's steady, he's calm under pressure, he's businesslike in that he maintains professionalism, but he's also got a great sense of humor, and he really cares about people. And it doesn't take long to be around him, whether you're a really young guardian or a senior member on the staff. It's very quick that Doug conveys that he actually cares about you as a person.
So both of you are deeply knowledgeable of the evolution of Mother Air Force and the personalities that led the way to bringing the Air Force out from under the Army into becoming its own service branch and department, right? We've got Mitchell, Doolittle, Arnold, and the first three chiefs of staff, right? Spatz, Vandenberg, Twining. It's required reading for all Air Force officers, and the both of you come out of that tradition. I think it's important for the audience, though, especially those who are on the outside of the military, to understand the evolution of the Space Force CSO. And we should do this before considering what Schiess needs to accomplish for the sake of the Space Force as the CSO. And I'm talking about the role and the unsaid requirements and responsibilities of this role. So where are we in that evolution of the Chief of Space Operations? And either one of you can take it.
Well, I think I'm going to pop right in and talk about this, because I've thought about this a lot and I feel like I've been around for it a lot, despite retiring and whatnot, but I've been super close. And here's what I think. And some of it, believe it or not, I think is normalized for organizations. When we stand up new organizations, sort of regardless of what they are, regardless of what they do. So we have a new organization. We have to legitimize it. We have to make it an actual organization. This is the charge for General Raymond, right? I mean, no kidding. We got to have a uniform. We got to have places to put the people. We have to have office. We have to have a symbol. What do the name tags look like? All of that type of, we need a song. We need all of those things. And I think General Raymond had what might be considered a thankless job of setting all of those things up while he was still fighting for the legitimacy of the existence of the service. I mean, that was very much part of what he was doing the entire time that he was the CSO, was having to demonstrate and explain and make people understand why we, the United States, need a separate service focused on the warfighting domain of space. So I really do think that was what General Raymond, whether it was said out loud or not, what he had to do. He had to create an organization, like physically. And then I think, and then he hands the baton off to General Saltzman. And what Saltzman did, I think, was really wonderful, because he ended up taking a lot of things that had been done behind closed doors and historically, but also some new thought, and created the doctrine for, to some large extent, space warfighting and how we're going to talk about the domain and how we're going to protect the domain and what we are going to do and not do. And he was working doctrine, endurance, space warfighting, just all of that. And I think that was really clutch and key to the evolution of what is happening with this organization as a military organization. We've stood it up. Now we have to understand what we do and why we do it, right? That's Saltzman. What are we doing and why are we doing it? How do we do it? And I think the baton, as it's getting passed to Doug Schiess, his job is going to be, all right, we got to go do it. We have to operationalize these things that we have set up, that we've been talking about, that we've done the big thought work on. Now it's time to operationalize this, to do this, to get the reps in, to get our Guardians used to doing what they're doing, and to get the sister services with whom they do those things used to who's doing what. I think that's what his role is. Again, the unspoken part of it for this next evolution in the arc of the story that is the Space Force.
And Patrick, I have this next question really teed up really specifically for you that I think follows on from what Jen just said. And it really is about leadership. What are the leadership challenges that come out of this reality of being a new service branch in a domain that you just can't see, say, like an air show? And, it is young, but there have been lots of changes, lots of movements, lots of new things. What are the challenges to lead that service branch now?
Well, I think the first challenge is similar to what Jen was just talking about, and that's, there's always too few resources to go around. And when a new entity stands up, it's going to pull resources from somewhere. And everybody plays really nice as long as everybody has a ball to play with. But when there's one ball too few, suddenly personalities change and you recognize that, wow, there's really a lot at stake here. And so I think one of the things that Doug is going to deal with differently in this role than he did in his previous is that, wow, that limited resources really do change behavior. And so being able to stake his claim and stand his ground and fight for the things that he knows his service needs, which is his charter, is going to be something that he's going to need to do, and that I think he's up to that challenge to do. One of the other challenges that I think he faces that others don't is, as you mentioned, the Space Force it's virtually unseeable in many ways. And it's also on the cutting edge. It's on the cutting edge of technology. We're thinking about things that either are not yet possible or have just become possible. And as a result, the service has been in really constant flux and will remain in flux for a while. And so one of the challenges I think that he is facing is, how do I communicate a measure of stability to a group of Guardians who are doing this really important job on the cutting edge of technology and provide them a degree of stability so that they can maintain their readiness into the future. We call it change fatigue. Change can happen so often and so quickly that people just get burnt out with the change. And so I think finding the rheostat to be able to adjust, to both take advantage of the opportunities and the capabilities that are out there and bring along the people who are doing those missions in a way that's sustainable, is something that I think, all the leaders of the Space Force are thinking about, but now this becomes one of Doug's key responsibilities to figure out.
How challenging is this for the space domain? I mean, as you both and I've alluded to, but most of you guys, space, you can't see it, you can't touch it. It's not like you can easily make a through line like you could say with the Chief of Staff of the Army down to a tank crew, right? I mean, there's an actual through line. It's tangible. You can see them. You can touch them. You know what color they're probably going to be. But for the Space Force, what are the challenges to leading something that isn't so tangible, and especially for an American public?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult. When it's something that you can see, you can count, you can very clearly demonstrate this is our contribution to this current conflict or situation that's going on. It's very easy to explain that to people who don't do this for a living. when your capabilities are harder to see, maybe impossible to see. I think, and really, I guess this is another challenge, is how does General Schiess tell a story that communicates the contribution and the criticality of the contribution in a way that non-professional space people can get their hands around and understand? And the more effective he is at that, the more effective he'll be at getting resources that are needed, of justifying why something is needed. And that is a difficult story to tell, but it's one that can be done, but it takes a lot of thought and probably some trial and error of what is the picture that people seem to grab hold of, that we can begin telling our story in a way that resonates not only with lawmakers, but with the general public.
And I think it's not just that it can't be seen, that space can't be seen. I feel like there's this sort of doubling down that happens, because my guess is that most people have it actually wrong. Not just that they're not thinking about it so much, but that they actually have it wrong. Because here's what ends up happening. People will have that phone in their hip pocket and think, well, this is what GPS is, right? This is all I need, and wave this phone around. You know, this actually happened. There's an old news clip from years and years and years ago, and it was during Desert Storm, and some reporter had stuck a microphone in front of a soldier's face and said, "What do you think about this being the first space war?" And the soldier said, "Space? I don't need space." And he held up a plugger, which is an old-timey GPS receiver. He goes, "I don't need space. I only need this thing right here to tell me where I am in the desert." Right? It's not only that he didn't know about space, like it was a zero balance, but then he got it wrong. Does that make sense? And I think that we have that as a challenge because people think they may have it right. Oh, I know about space because my phone, it's GPS. Except there's so much more to it than that. And, there are these rooms that are dark with lots of computers in them, with a bunch of guardians in them working, making sure that a bunch of these constellations are up in space and are actually happening. And then, of course, at the same time, not just from a military perspective, but your average, Jane Q citizen is also dealing and experiencing what civilian and commercial space capabilities are bringing to them as well, and probably also not understanding the depth of which that is happening. So, knowing all of that, believing all of that to be true, how I've just laid that out, I think every guardian has a challenge in trying to explain and make the people in their own orbit, forgive the pun, understand what's going on with space. And then I think it's up to the leaders of the Space Force that all sort of be shepherded and herded in a particular direction. Use those forces for good is what we need to do. And we're at this point in time where bad things are happening in space by nefarious actors, and we have to be able to preserve our own capabilities. And we need the support of the public and therefore the Congress to be able to do that.
Final question. What does Schiess need to accomplish and why? And I know there's a whole myriad of things. But if you could choose a priority, what would that be? What does he need to do to move the ball forward? Patrick, you want to go first on that?
Okay. What does he need to move the ball forward? I can't speak space. I'm one of those people that think space is my GPS on my phone. But what I will say is that what I think any service needs, and space is certainly no different, is a leader of integrity who has principles that go beyond the job description, that go beyond some future advancement or some future role that happens after his time in the service ends. A person who can be counted on when difficult decisions need to be made, to base those on strong character, a character of integrity, a character of transparency, somebody who conveys not only to the people he leads, but to the nation as a whole, that he truly has the nation's best interests in mind, and he's going to do everything in his power to stay true to the principles to move the service in the right direction.
Well, I
Jen,
think
what about
the
you?
number one thing, and there's a couple of nuances to this, of course, but the number one thing is going to be about operationalizing all of the great doctrine and concepts that have been brought to bear by earlier leaders before him, and then to double down on those and see actually, can we make it all work? So we need to talk about competitive endurance and what that actually looks like while we're working with our commercial partners, while we're working with our allies. How do things change when red lines are crossed in space and we need to respond in kind? Should we respond in kind? What does in kind look like in the space domain? I think there are a myriad of questions that we've not been allowed to talk about for so long. And the arc of space operations, not just the arc of the Space Force, but the arc of space operations has sort of led us to this place where we are now and where the world has brought us to as well. And it's time to have these discussions. And I think he is the right guy in the right job for us collectively, space-minded individuals and organizations to start working on, continue working on these really hard operational topics and how we're going to deal with what might become untenable situations that we find ourselves in that relate to the warfighting domain of space, and how are we going to deal with those? And I think he's the guy. I'm looking forward to how he leads us through what's next to come.
Jen, Patrick, thank you both so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really fun time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you inviting me on. It was good. Thank you.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.